My name is Artemis. I'm here to talk to you about the complex nature of queer data and how I use it to investigate the role models and challenges of LGBTQ plus people in STEM, which is a bit of a mouthful. I do appreciate. We'll go on from there. So a bit about me. I studied at Cardiff University, graduated last year with a bachelor's in physics, and then I've gone on to a well-known and unnamed insurance company. They haven't affiliated with this talk, just because they don't want me saying anything I'm not allowed to say about how insurance works. So it could be any company, I'm not sure. But if you do want to know any tips on lowering your premiums, get me a cup of glass of wine afterwards, and I'll spill literally everything. And yeah, the reason I'm talking to you today, my dissertation was on this queer role models in STEM. And I managed an article published off of it in Physics World, which should have been in print in January. I haven't got a copy, so I don't know. It is. You've seen it? Oh, I've not seen this yet, but it is in print. And it was online before that. So why did I pick to look at queer role models in STEM? Well, when I started university, I was quite a strong trans ally, a very strong trans ally, a very, very strong trans ally. I used to sort of research things like trans people and being trans and feeling some gender dysphoria and being genderqueer. And, I used to play as women in video games a lot. And then it turned out that I was in fact trans, which surprised exactly none of my friends. My friends of which you'll see here. These are mostly people I met on my physics course. And it was mostly the queer people that I met on the physics course. And I realized that my friend group made up a large proportion of the queer people in physics. And it made me think, why are we being so underrepresented? And it's the same for other subjects. I know engineering, a lot worse apparently. It's the same for other subjects. That's sort of the stuff I wanted to look at. So a good place to start when you think role models is the Draw a Scientist test. This has been done for many, many years. The idea is basically just get kids to draw what they think a scientist looks like. And this is the results for girls drawing a girl as a scientist. You'll see that in the 60s and 70s, 1% of girls were drawing a feminine coded scientist. By the mid-80s, it jumped up to about 33%. And 2016, I believe, was the first year that more than 50% of girls were drawing a girl as a scientist. So it's mostly drawing stuff like this. And it's mad-looking, masculine-coded, older-looking scientists, oversized lab kits, big lab coats, and scary monsters, so things that come up a lot. And we know these stereotypes aren't always true. The scary monsters part is true. I've seen what marine biologists get up to, and it's terrifying. And it's not really surprising, because when you look at the sorts of role models that kids have had for the past 40 or 50 years, there are a lot of stereotypes here. Tends to be older, male, straight, crazy hair, often white, especially in older media as well. So this is the sort of things that kids are seeing, and this sort of things that they're drawing. And when you look at sort of nowadays, we do have more women in STEM. The issue is not fixed. It's definitely not fixed, but it is getting better. We've got some fictional characters like the Doctor, and we've got real people like Professor Hannah Fry. I've got a friend, Carmen, who studies neuropsychology here at Exeter, actually. And she recently cited that Nina from Nina and the Neurons was a direct influence into her getting into STEM. And now she goes off and talks to other kids about STEM and stuff. So, it's carrying that forward a bit. So there's three main things I wanted to look at, and that is inspirations. So what's inspiring queer people into STEM, fit, which is how well represented and included queer people are in STEM, and challenges, which is what it says on the tin, how the system is working against queer people. The way I did this was with a survey. This was sent out on the 7th of March, and I did interviews after that. It used a thing called snowball sampling, which, if you're aware of, is the idea of sending out like a survey or something to a certain community of people and encouraging them to send it to people they know, or send it to people they know, etc., etc. And it's really good at getting some survey out through a particular group of people. So a lot of queer people know other queer people. So it's quite easy to kind of get that sent out. I did give it a bit of a push and sent it to all of the Russell Group unis, a staff and student queer network for each, and the top 20 to 30 rated unis for comp sci, just because it was a fairly generic STEM subject. And also the Prism network put it out for me as well. I managed to get some responses through there as well. So I'll go on to the I'll go on to the data collection in a minute. I'll start with the results though. We got 161 responses, with only one being declared null. which is a pretty good turnout. This is the split between cis and trans people. Also, I will say, I am a data scientist now. My data visualization skills have got really good. This was made at uni, so it's not very good, but I can do better than this, I promise. One thing worth noting, the numbers aren't adding up to 100%. That's because if you're in medicine and in biology, you can select both. Also, it's worth keeping in mind that this is more like a window. It's not a comprehensive report of the amount of people in computer science who are trans and cis, even though it would be really nice to confirm that 3/4 of computer scientists are trans. It's just whoever we managed to reach with the survey. This was split between professionals and students. So again, it was about 50-50, I think 60-40 on this split, but it meant we got a really good diverse range of professionals and students, cis people, trans people, and a lot of different sexual identities as well, responding to the survey. So the first question, hands up if you think there's enough queer role models in STEM. Cool. 75% of people agreed with you that there's not enough queer role models in STEM. Now, this doesn't mean there aren't enough. It can also just mean that there's not easy enough access. So things like what we're doing today is great with the portraits and stuff like that. But yeah, 75% of people generally disagree that there are enough queer role models in STEM. This kind of gives like a really good overview of just like the whole subject as a whole. When we break it down a little bit, one of the more complicated questions I asked was to rate on a scale of 1 to 7 how important various factors were in getting people into STEM. And I went for family, media, fiction, and teachers. So when we look at the group as a whole, teachers were the most important thing for getting people into STEM. But when you break it down between cis people and trans people are slightly more likely to look towards media and fiction than cis people. I thought this was quite interesting. So I decided to talk to people in interviews about this. And one thing that came up a lot was the idea of queer coding. In this context, I'm referring to the idea of prescribing your own queer identity onto a traditionally non-queer character. So one big example is John Locke, not the lost character or the philosopher, but John Watson and Sherlock Holmes from the 2000s Sherlock TV show. So 2016 Tumblr went absolutely wild for these two. There was so many images like this, stories. I can't show half the images of John Locke. But it meant that people were putting their own queer identity onto these characters and then really connecting with them through this like prescribed identity. So a more relevant example would be the Doctor from Doctor Who. This is something that came back a lot in interviews and also in the survey. This is a character who has switched between being a man, a woman, back to a man again. And each individual incarnation has sort of like different presentations of a gender identity and sexual identity and stuff like that. And it means that people can sort of relate to aspects of the Doctor, the character, and then also relate to this being a STEM-coded character. And this provided a lot of inspiration for a lot of people who responded in the survey. So moving on to the fit section, we asked people how comfortable they feel expressing their queer identity within friend groups and within academia. You see, naturally, it was lower within academia by quite some margin. So this means people aren't doing the best work they possibly can, because we know that when people don't feel comfortable within a workplace, within academia, within university, they don't perform as well as they possibly can, which means that it's a real deficit to the science community because people aren't doing perhaps the potential work they could be doing because they're just not feeling comfortable. A more complicated question we asked students whether they think they're going to have trouble getting a job in STEM. And then we asked professionals if they did have trouble getting a job in STEM. So I will start with the highlights. Not a lot of professionals said that they had trouble getting a job in STEM, which is great. Some of the less good things, trans students specifically, are reporting really high numbers of people saying that they think they're worried about getting a job in STEM, over 40%. The other thing to remember is survivorship bias. So this is a classic data science bias. I'm going to put the picture up. Data scientists love this one. I'll tell you the story as quick as I can. World War II, planes were coming in with loads of bullet holes. And engineers were going, right, we're going to patch up the bullet holes because this is where planes are being shot the most. So they patched up these planes, sent them out again, and they realized that it wasn't helping. It wasn't making more planes come back. And the reason is, these are the planes that are coming back. The planes that are coming back have these bullet holes in, the ones being shot in the engines, in the rotors, in other like sensitive parts like that aren't coming back. They're the ones that you need to be sort of like reinforcing those areas. So this, the least bullet holes is actually what you want to be reinforcing. So back to our context, we're asking cis professionals and trans professionals who are queer whether they had trouble getting a job, but they've got a job. So perhaps if someone was to do more research on this, you could ask all graduates who are queer whether they had trouble getting a job afterwards. Lastly, I'll just talk about the challenges section. So discrimination is thankfully a minority of people who are feeling less valued here, and people who experience discrimination or harassment. But it's still quite a high minority of people who are saying they've reported feeling discrimination, harassment, stuff like that, and feeling their ideas less well received. So the kind of summary that I got from the project was that there's no real easy fix. It would be great to get more queer people into STEM, because then we'd have more queer role models in STEM. But to do that, we need more queer role models in STEM, which needs more queer people in STEM, and it makes a vicious circle. Trans people are feeling this effect more than most, and that's why we're looking towards fiction, which is either a good or bad thing. You can take this as trans people are so underrepresented that we're having to make up our own role models. Or you could look at it and go, right, well, we know that fiction and media works well on trans people. Maybe we should start creating more fictional scientists that we can use to inspire people. There's always small steps that we can do to create more welcoming environments, things like pride pins, things like pronouns in bios, all the classic stuff. And then bigger things like targeted outreach, going into prides and queer youth groups and stuff, showing them STEM and sort of encouraging queer people into STEM without othering them. That was something that came up a lot in the interviews, is the idea of you don't want to exclude queer people and make STEM different for them. Gender options on surveys. Now, this is one of my big pet peeves. I used to work at a school uniform shop in Swindon. It was a really horrible, terrible one. And on their registration form for new staff, it had male, male, female, transgender, other. And that was all the gender options. So you get one of two different types of man, don't know what the difference is. Or just a transgender, which is, for one thing, quite dehumanizing to just be labeled as a transgender. The other thing is, from a data point of view, what are they asking? What are they actually getting back from that? They don't know if I'm a man or if I'm a woman, what my pronouns are, anything like that. It's just useless data collection. Tag yourself on here. I'm either a tax entity, stainless steel, or the ominous option 5. So I designed this, which isn't perfect, but it goes to help a bit. So this is basically, it's a list of attributes that you can select from to create your identity. So you'd select transgender, female, non-binary, and all those things will go together to make your identity. There's also an other box, an I don't know, and I don't understand question. You might be thinking, Artie, why don't you just use a free text box? Well, research has shown that free text boxes actually get less diverse gender responses than like a diverse list of options. They think it might be something to do with the boxes, having like boxes there and seeing your identity makes you feel like more comfortable with answering the question in the survey and makes you feel more seen and represented. Whereas a free text box is very cold and harsh and you have to like enter it yourself. Also, from a data point of view, free text boxes make me fall on the floor, be sick, and go into shock. You would not believe the amount of times I've seen people write a postcode wrong in a free text box. It's incredible. So data collection wise, it's much easier to just use the tick boxes. Getting ethical approval of this project was a bit of a pain in the ass. It took quite a long while. And that's probably a good thing, because I did want to ask a lot of personal questions. I want to take a lot of information from people, like a lot of private information, a lot of things that people, not necessarily, they don't feel comfortable talking about. So the ethical approval should take a long while, because you do need a good reason. And this is something the census suffered from slightly. So a lot of investigations have been done to the census. This is the first one, 2021, to have gender options and sexuality options that were more diverse. And there was a 6% non-response rate on gender identity and a 7.47% non-response rate on the gender identity. No, the other one. Anyway, and I think part of the reason for this might be the older demographic felt less comfortable in answering these questions and sort of felt less comforted by the idea of sending this data off to the Census Bureau, particularly because they've experienced a lot more in their life. So it meant that older people weren't being counted as much in the census, but also young people as well. If you're a student, you don't have a fixed address, 16 to 25 sort of age range, it's way harder to actually fill out the census, which means that a demographic that we know tends to be more queer also weren't answering these questions. And that's something I had to consider with my survey. that it's whoever I can get it out to, and you're always limited by the reach that your survey has. Now, the next part I can't talk about, so I haven't talked about this part, but does anybody remember Sheila's Wheels? Yeah. The adverts, I think they had songs, they had like the pink Barbie car and like pink sparkly women, and this was rating insurance based on gender, and women were getting much better deals on their car insurance. The reason for this, women aren't necessarily safer drivers. They do claim more on insurance, but when they claim, it's often a lot lower. But men claim on insurance a lot less, but when they do, they've totaled the car. And this means that women could get a lot cheaper insurance for their cars. And that meant that the government very quickly put in a lot of restrictions on whether you could rate on gender, because women were getting the better end of the deal. So I can't say much more about this, but what I can say is that you can't rate insurance based on gender. You can rate insurance based on occupation. So if I was a mechanic or a nurse, so you have to be very careful to make sure you're not accidentally rating insurance on something you can't rate on. Don't know how they do it. It could be any way of doing it, but it does involve data collection on protected characteristics. To summarize, we're in quite bleak times at the moment. There's a lot of news with a lot of depressing stats sort of coming out every week. And it can be really important to collect this sort of data because it makes us feel less alone. And it makes us feel like we sort of count, even if it is on some physics student's bar graph. Thank you. Any questions?